morning, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. And well, as you have already gathered, this is probably the most sexy presentation from the title. I'll try to make it a bit more palatable. Let's start from the first controversy about defining what is a regional airport. Because what ACI tells us is that an airport is regional if it serves short and medium-range routes and mainly point-to-point destination. Now, as all the general definition, and considering the quite intricate European situation, well, this definition produced monsters. 28 million passengers in 2018, London area, Stansted. Is that a regional airport? For ACI, yes. For the purpose of what we're going to discuss today, which is state aid, probably not. Airports like this, by definition, structurally, are able to recover the cost of their operation and their investments. We are talking about the small fishes today, and how can they survive going forward. What we're trying to do is to concentrate this definition, to try to make it descend into the reality of the airport aviation in Europe. And we try to segregate the three or four main characteristics of a regional airport. Location. Well, normally these guys are based in not very densely populated area, far from big cities or massive catchment areas. Function, well, they serve a local community that in lack of that airport, if that airport wouldn't be there, would probably suffer, the economy would suffer, the import and export would become very, very difficult. The network is mainly a good mix, a good composite mix of feeding into main hubs and point-to-point destinations served mainly by low-cost carriers. Size. For this discussion, we have taken all the airports up to 5 million passengers. And location. Normally these guys are in a location where they provide very few alternatives to air travel, low population density, long coastline, limited access to high-speed trains. Function, as we said, if this airport weren't there, very likely we would see progressively and in long term population moving away. If we don't give access to air travel to the business, for education purposes, for economy purposes, the risk is that we would see this area progressively dying. Now, 40% of flights out of regional airports start from airports below 5 million passengers. And again, the mix of these flights is operated through hub connection feeding models and point-to-point models. But in the last 5 years, we have seen growing this new low-cost, long-haul kind of model, which is reshaping a bit the traditional concept of traffic at airports and models of flying at certain airports. So what we are seeing now, more and more, are models of natural self-connecting, i.e., look at what happened recently between Ryanair and Air Europa, where they have developed models of cooperation, whereas you can fly from X airport in X region into Madrid, get on board of an Air Europa flight and fly to Brazil. So more and more inventive and needs to increase revenues are producing interesting new models that up to 5-10 years ago, the Aviation Academy couldn't even put it on a book study. Now, let's try to do a 28 rules. We see 800 airports in Europe below 10 million passengers. Up to 5 million, we have 697 smaller airports that generate 440 million passengers and almost 10 million movements. It's a lot, and it's a lot of passengers and a lot of flights that without those regional airports would have to probably resolve for itself, and I go back to the Claire presentation from Aerocontrol, and they would worsen the overall congestion situation in Europe. Now, European Commission and state aid. The majority of these airports struggle, and have always struggled, to recover operating costs, and they don't know how to tackle massive investment costs. That's where the European Union has issued the European guidelines in 2014, which basically dictated the criteria through which these airports have the possibility to have access to public funds. In 2017, as a part of its global new state aid modernization initiative, the European Union has further diminished the burdens and the administrative constraints for these airports to have access to these funds. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? There is a big academy and a big debate around it. Do these airports drain public money? Do they deserve to drain public money? Should we continue to allow so? Now, there are state aid investments in airport infrastructure. First of all, you need to qualify and assess whether there is a genuine transport need. Does this airport need to exist because it helps the transportation and the movement of the local passenger because of economy reasons, because of education reasons, or public prevalent reasons? Depending on the size of these airports and of the number of the passengers transported, the airports are allowed to have access to increasing public funds levels. Now, we distinguish two kinds of aids: operating aid to airports and investment aids. Well, the operating aid are admitted for all the passengers with less than 3 million passengers per year, and they are allowed for a transitional period of 10 years. But to get those money, the airport needs to demonstrate that they can recover their operating costs through a virtuous circle of private investor or MEO test, market in economy operator. The European Union has further enhanced the possibility for this airport to have access to this operating aid for those airports minus than 700,000 passengers. Again, prerequisite is to demonstrate that over these intermediate periods, you can recover your cost and you can basically justify the absorption of public aid. Investment aid. They are relevant for airports up to 5 million passengers, and they are still, their level depends on, and the intensity depends on the size of the airport, and can basically fund from 25 to 75% of the overall investment. What you have to do, if you want those money, you need to basically declare that you are going to get this money and you're going to use them for investments. In 2017, it was admitted the possibility for the airports with less than 3 million passengers to actually be exempt from this prior notification. Next 10 years. Very recently, in the last few months, the European Union, and in particular, the Directorate General for the Competition, has basically placed a contract to an important European cabinet to carry out an investigation through the majority of the regional airports. They've taken 50 regional airports and issued a number of questions with 3 main directives and boundaries. First, are the existing guidelines fit for purpose? Are they adequate in terms of amount of money allowed as a public fund? And is the size of the airports involved correct? B, is the categorization of the airports correct? In other words, are the thresholds identified reflecting the real situation of the airports in Europe and their need to receive public funds? And finally, these airports, and in general all the European airports accessing to these funds, needs to demonstrate the contribution and the impact to the economy and to the regional development through their activity. Now, this is the general theory. Let's try to derive the real questions behind this activity, behind the public funding, behind the future for these small regional airports. The world kind is divided into Darwin theory, fittest of survival. Smallest airport will not be able to recover cost. Public funds will finish. They will close down. And it's a way to look at the world. Then there is the most, how can I put it, politically sensible approach, which is, okay, these airports need to recover cost. If they don't do it in 10 years, let's give them a bit more time. And in any way, they serve a higher purpose, mobility of people and mobility and access of economies to other economies that couldn't join before. So again, brutally and briefly, shall we close these guys get down if they don't demonstrate the possibility to recover cost? And shall we actually put an end in 2024 to the public funding? Well, probably what we should do is to just admit the principle that these guys and all the airports and their management companies, they don't exist to lose money. And there's an interesting phenomenon I'd like to bring to your attention. In 2016, 41% of European airports had private shareholders, up to from only 22% in 2010. What does it mean? Private investors are more and more getting access to small regional airports. They're trying to spot the business, spot the opportunity, understand the real value of the airport, trying to develop growth plan that would, in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, based on their industrial plan, recover this money and make them profitable. And this is a natural model. Whether it's going to take 5 years or 4 or 8, the market will determine, the health of the aviation industry will determine, we'll see. An interesting model. A lot of these very small but successful airports are adhering to the model of so-called public service delegation. They remain public as a property, but they attribute to private investors the day-to-day operational management of the airport itself and the possibility for them to actually take care of the commercial growth. So you basically hire a private guy to do the job for you. This has happened, for instance, with Vinci in France, which is exactly doing this in airports like Dinard, Chambéry, Saint-Nazaire, etc., with good results, I have to say. And to echo what Claire was saying before in her presentation, Eurocontrol, again, consider if this airport closed down, what happens to the aviation in Europe? Well, by 2035, 12% of demand for air transport will not be accommodated due to a lack of airport capacity in Europe. So again, crucial role of the regional airport to help in this process. And then this means what? 2 million flights not taking place and 237 million passengers potentially unable to fly. European hubs are, for most of cases, at really high-level congested situation. And again, look at what's happening. A solution could be Schiphol and Lelystad. You mentioned that, Claire, before. So using regional airport in the presence of the hub to decongest them and possibly to divert specific model of flying into that airport. In a world which is more and more subject to external factors like wars, fuel increases, where companies go bust from one day to another, probably we need to look more at working with the Charlie Brown approach and understand the interdependency of the various actors in aviation. That's where we are, regional airports, and we send our passengers to the major airports in hubs and to the airlines. Thank you. If there are questions, I'll be happy to take them.